Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Matt Preem, Eric Scopel, 24/7 Sports. We bring on Nick Osen of 24/7 Sports as well, who covers the Badgers for our Wisconsin site. First time on the show, Nick. Thanks for coming on the show. It's going to be a fun time. Eric and I both going to be in Madison for this one. First time in a while that these two teams have played in the regular season. So there's a lot of excitement just overall with this game. And let's start here with Luke Fickell. Second season. How would we describe the transition through essentially now 2 seasons? The Badgers have always been a run-first physical team. Fickell's offenses at previous stops have been more spread. How have these kind of blended together? How would we describe the Luke Fickell experience through 2 seasons?
Yeah, guys, thank you so much for having me. And I didn't realize you'd both be in Madison, so that'll be a blast. With Fickell so far, I think that, in a couple words, I'd say it's been a transition, right? But I think it was a necessary one. I don't think people really realize with kind of the ever-changing landscape and adding, great teams like Oregon in the Big Ten and things like that, what is really necessary in terms of modernizing the team a little bit, plus kind of taking a jump in recruiting. And so I think you started to see the trajectory there a little bit, but I understand fans have, maybe been looking for or kind of asked for a little bit more early on probably than we've seen. And I think it was just kind of a total change schematically on both sides of the ball, quite honestly, which I don't think a lot of people knew would happen right away. So I'd say you're still kind of starting to see it as a transition, Matt. But I think slowly but surely you're starting to see kind of some of the potential and some of the progress, certainly off the field, but I think it's getting there on the field in some areas.
Nick, it's been kind of an odd season for the Badgers, just kind of looking at their schedule. And obviously we're not able to watch every single game, but checking out the highlights. And there are weeks where this team looks incredibly dominant. They had that three-game run there where they just kind of blew the doors off of competition. Then you look at their losses, and they haven't been particularly close in those games. So it's kind of like a blowout one way or the other. How would you explain kind of these results? And I guess just broadly, like kind of an uneven season for the Badgers, kind of what's transpired there?
Yeah, absolutely, Eric. So I think I'd take you back kind of to right away in the season, because I know fans were starting to, maybe be a little surprised that they didn't completely blow the doors off of a couple teams like Western Michigan and South Dakota. Now, I was telling fans, I think they're taking things a little bit, not easy, but maybe not opening everything up when you've got Bama coming to town next. And, I stand by that. I think that was a little bit of what we saw. Now, Alabama is Alabama. I don't think a lot of people expected that to be a win. Then shortly after, you get to that dominant 3-game win streak. And I felt like they did what good teams are supposed to do. Right? Beating bad teams and absolutely dominating them, specifically defensively. It was actually the best 3-game stretch in about 10 seasons, just allowing 1 touchdown in 3 games. And then it was Penn State, which, those first 3 quarters, they actually battled evenly. Mm-hmm. I think the big question mark that you kind of look at is, okay, what happened at Iowa? Because these are 2 teams that should be pretty close. Iowa, they did what many people expect, just run the ball. Caleb Johnson, Brendan Sullivan at quarterback. And I think that's the one that even had me a little bit like, okay, what was, maybe the issue here? What was going on? We got to talk to Fickell and the players after in Iowa City. And obviously nobody expected that result. So now I think you're going to see what this team really is these last 3 weeks of the season.
Tawee Walker is the latest star running back for Wisconsin. And it's a lineage that goes back decades. They always have a good running back. He's second in the conference in touchdowns. He's tied there with, ironically, Jordan James of Oregon, and then on a guy at Rutgers behind Caleb Johnson, who's just doubled everybody up with 20. But back to Walker, really good player here. Senior, what's made him so effective in his first season at the position or I should say at the school? Was previously at Oklahoma.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, what really caught our eyes back in spring ball, getting to speak with him, see him play a little bit, and certainly the eyes of Fickell and the staff is just kind of a really humble approach, right? You mentioned, being at Oklahoma, he was a walk-on there, guys. He had to earn every opportunity he had there. believe it was a JUCO / community college before that. Palomar that, he played his way through to get up to Oklahoma. So I think just the mentality is really strong. You've seen that in a lot of Badger running backs. And then number 2 is the physicality. I mean, he's not looking to just kind of get through hits. Like, he's looking to deliver a blow too, which I think really has impressed the staff and his teammates. He's not necessarily a burner, but, he's got enough burst and speed to at least get to that second level. Maybe not always the third that you've seen from, guys like Jonathan Taylor and things like that. But he's been a good player and a really, really good pickup in the portal.
I'm curious, this is an interesting part that we haven't touched on, which is this offense was supposed to be led by a different quarterback. Obviously, Van Dyke goes down against Alabama. That's brutal to lose a quarterback in non-conference play, especially when it's season ending. And then they switch over to Braden Locke. And I'm curious, kind of what are the strengths and weaknesses that he presents? And then also, like, has the offense and kind of what I know the philosophy probably doesn't change a lot, but has the offense shifted a little bit from what they were doing with Van Dyke now that there's a different signal caller?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Eric. So it was, I think tough initially just kind of from a personal level with guys because Van Dyke's dealt with injuries before and everything just kind of came to a halt like that. With Braden Locke, I think some of his top strengths are really decision-making, in terms of like pre-snap abilities, reading, checks, and Coach Phil Longo was just talking about that this week. Like he says it all the time. He's a junkie. Like the guy lives in the film room. And he delivers a pretty good deep ball as well. Maybe not as mobile as a guy like Tyler Van Dyke, but has had some troubles, really with interceptions. I'd say especially the last couple games. So that's hurt offensively. And then just in terms of the offense, and this is something I mentioned earlier with Matt as well throughout 247. I think playing with pace, right, a little more up-tempo, kind of giving Locke some of the ownership and kind of autonomy at the line to maybe make some decisions. I think that's a way the offense has shifted a little bit just because of Locke's kind of familiarity within the offense. Not that it wasn't the case with Van Dyke, but it's hit home a little bit more. Maybe not as many QB runs, things like that. I mean, that's actually what ended up hurting Van Dyke is he actually was scrambling and took the ball himself. But overall, there have been some highs, but definitely some struggles with turnovers recently too.
Will Pauling is by far wide receiver 1 for Wisconsin with 70 targets. That's more than double the next closest guy on the roster. He's wide receiver 1. That's very clear. What is it about his connection with Locke? Why is he wide receiver 1? And then what is the thoughts around him? Because it doesn't feel like they've got a couple guys. Vinny Anthony's had a couple big 50-yard touchdowns, I think twice this year. But it just doesn't feel like maybe they've got the explosiveness outside of Pauling or the go-to mentality. What's this wide receiver room like?
Yeah, so Pauling definitely gets the most targets, as he should. He was one of the best wide receivers, certainly in the Big Ten last year. Actually had a really prolific stat line. And, he's just ideal in this Phil Longo offense coming out of the slot. He's strong. He's gotten a little bit faster, explosive, like you mentioned. But, Matt, Vinny Anthony has really come into his own this year too. A lot of fans and even kind of some of the players, when we speak to them, they told us about like, all right, look out for Anthony. And, he's really taken some jumps this year. I think he's explosive. I think CJ Williams has come a long way too. But I think just in terms of consistency and maybe establishing like a consistent chemistry, that's maybe still coming along a little bit with some of the guys. And I think you look for maybe some more pass production at tight end at times. It's a very, very young room. But yeah, Pauling kind of at that top. But I think Vinny, man, he's really turned some heads this fall too.
Yeah, Vinny, I think leads the team in receiving yards, right?
Yeah, yep. Because of some of those long games like Matt mentioned, and in terms of touchdowns, but also I can think of just a couple like 38-yard, go route 37, and he gets you inside the 10. So he's been a major role, and I think honestly with his skill set, I think he's still yet to take another jump too. He kind of reminds me, not saying they're the same player, but just in terms of speed, being able to blow you off the line, similar to what some guys like Tez Johnson can do out west.
And we should note, like CJ Williams, like former USC Trojan, matter-day guy. I think Oregon had some flirtations with him. Like 12 of his 14 catches are first down. So, like, they've got some guys there, but it just feels like Will's kind of the guy.
Mm-hmm.
Let's move over to the – oh, sorry. Did you have more there, Nick?
Yeah, I was just going to say I agree, Matt. It's a great point on C.J. Williams. He's actually been really, really responsive in terms of third downs. I know that a lot of those have been on kind of those money down plays, and he's established more chemistry with Locke too.
I just wanted to get into the offensive line because I think at tackle, especially, there's a couple NFL players there. Give us a sense. Like I think historically, and when you're on the West Coast watching Wisconsin football, you expect them to be awesome in the trenches, and I think I don't think that's really different this year. Has this offensive line been up to expectation, and kind of how much have they been able to lean on them with all the kind of moving parts, especially at quarterback?
Yeah, I think that's a phenomenal question, Eric, especially that second part, because, Coach Longo and Coach Fickell have talked a lot about needing to lean on the O-line, right? Maybe when quarterback went down, or, maybe the inside run game wasn't where it needed, or just pass pro, things of that nature. And you hit it right on the head with Riley Mahlman and Jag Nelson. Those are two future NFL guys. I think that there were a lot of expectations on Nelson last year, and I think he'd tell you himself he maybe wasn't where he needed to be. Now, I think he certainly is. I mean, at that size, with some of that athleticism, he's been really good. And when you watch those 3 games I mentioned earlier, that 3-game win streak, guys, they were almost unstoppable. Like, it was truly, really impressive. They were getting 7, 11, 18-yard gains from Tawee Walker, Darian Dupree, Cade Giacomelli, whenever they needed. So I think while it hasn't been perfect at all times, I think the O-line has taken a lot of ownership on the offense, and I think it's actually been kind of under the tutelage of A.J. Blazik now at O-line coach, as well as Casey Robach, a former Badger player. I think it's starting to get a little bit closer to what we saw in those early to mid-2010s and some of the kind of great dominance that you see as Badger O-line.
I think Eric's going to dive into the secondary as well, but let's stick with the corners here. Ricardo Hallman's been an absolute stud. Fewest targets at the FBS level this season of just 18 of guys that I think play 200 snaps or more this season. What's made him so good, and the impact of locking down half the field. Danny Lanning's like, you just don't throw the ball at him. Smart teams just don't go to Hallman's side. And then he also said, but you have to try him at least a couple times. But what's made Hallman so good? And then I guess opposite him at the other cornerback spot and the nickelback spot, how have those guys been able to kind of flourish where Hallman has half the field covered up?
Yeah, Matt, I think that's really interesting from Coach Lanning, because Hallman has been honestly phenomenal. And if you looked and watched him play, I think that would have been 2 seasons ago, so kind of right before I got back on this beat. I don't think many would have projected him to be an All-American guy last year. So I think obviously he gets a ton of credit, for the time he put in, the development. I think Coach Paul Haynes, who was a new corners coach with this staff in 23, I think he's done a terrific job. Hallman's just one of those classic players that puts the extra time in before, after practice. You see him with guys. So I think it's really just been kind of time working on technique. And in terms of on the field, he's a technician, right? He's not the biggest corner. He's not the fastest necessarily, though he's got some speed to him. He's not the most athletic, but just in terms of functioning technicalities, he is terrific in coverage. And then outside of Hallman, really good story, actually, Nazir Forkurine, a Grand Valley State transfer. There were some high expectations, I'd say, coming into the spring, just because of what we've heard from some of the staff and his offseason. I think he's lived up to the hype. He's a little bigger, taller, physical. He can hit in the run game too. And then at nickel, you're going to see guys like Max Lofi or Austin Brown. Austin Brown was a 4-star recruit. I believe an athlete label, like he could play a few different spots. And, he's found kind of a home at safety or nickelback. He's very, very physical, pretty good ball skills, great closing speed. So even when this season hasn't been maybe perfect for what Badgers fans hope for, the secondary has not disappointed.
Nick, I'm going to turn this into a bit of a two-parter here because I do think we need to talk about Zachman and Wooler at safety, probably one of the better tandems Oregon will face this year. But I also want, maybe after you can kind of touch on those guys, talk about the front seven, because statistically, I think you think again of strong trench play from Wisconsin. And this year it's kind of been flipped on its head where they're top 10, I think, nationally in pass defense, but quite a bit further down in terms of run defense. So maybe kind of speak to that, but also I want to hear about the safeties more.
Yeah, I'll go into safeties a little bit first, Eric. Really good group, right? Hunter Wooler, was kind of a preseason All-American, certainly all Big Ten guy, NFL potential. He could have gone last year. And he's just kind of your, ball hawk. He can be all over the field, but again, loves to hit. A Wisconsin kid, former high 4-star recruit. And he's had a terrific Badgers career. Zachman has been one of the best surprises, I would say, this fall.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't guaranteed that he was maybe going to be the guy. They had other names, really kind of featured other older players that could have fought for starting or certainly a lot of snaps. But, Fickell would tell you himself, even though he loves to kind of roll and go into the depths of defense, those are two guys he doesn't like taking off the field. Mm-hmm. So I think that they've really impressed. And in terms of the run game, I think the D-line has been hurt a little bit since August because they lost their best player, James Thompson Jr., about a week before the season to injury. So best D lineman for sure, one of the best complete players. That's hurt a little bit. Not a ton. There's a lot of talent in the room, right? But it's still very young guys. I'm talking true freshmen getting snaps right now, guys like Dylan Johnson. So guys that are still coming up in the ranks. I think that's a reason, why maybe the run defense isn't what you've always seen, in addition to, a newer scheme this last year and a half.
Let's dive into Saturday's game. I truly believe, like every team in the Big Ten, maybe outside of Purdue and Northwestern, can have a path to success for being in a position in the fourth quarter to beat Oregon. I think there's enough talent across the board. What is Wisconsin's? What are the things that the Badgers, one of the two things that, hey, like we have to do this to go into the fourth quarter to have a chance to get a win? Because Oregon's they're a road favorite by a pretty big number from what I was anticipating. What are the paths of success you feel like for Wisconsin?
Yeah, so Oregon's really interested me because I actually thought coming into the year they would be the best team in the Big Ten. I can honestly say that. And then those first 3-4 weeks, Boise and I think it was Idaho, it was like, okay, maybe things are still clicking. Now they've risen to the top. I think Lanning should get a lot of credit. The talent is obvious. So this is by no means going to be an easy victory. I like the Badgers' chances against Penn State recently a little bit better. However, something that I think you need to do, number one, is make Gabriel uncomfortable. Now, with that O-line and the weapons that he has, plus his legs at times, it's a lot more easier said than done. But I think with the secondary that Wisconsin has, I do think there's potential for an interception, especially when he had 2 against the Spartans defense that isn't so good this year. So I think that's the obvious. Then offensively, I don't think this group in terms of Wisconsin can really, kind of wade themselves into this game, if that makes sense. I think they need to come out firing. I think a guy like Vinny Anthony needs to be a major key. Lean on Tawee Walker in that offensive line, but don't just kind of expect to get that rolling early, because as we know, and I learned more just talking with Matt earlier, that Oregon Ducks defensive line is not short on blue chip talent. So that's certainly going to be important. Braden Locke's going to have to take not only great care of the offense, but better care of the football as well, Matt.
As we mentioned earlier, we'll both be out there for this one. I'm fired up. I know there'll be a fair number of Oregon fans making the trip as well. And I think there's quite a bit of excitement for what this game can be and being at Camp Randall in general from the Oregon side. I'm curious on the flip side, what's this kind of been the buildup for this? It's a different situation here where I know highly ranked teams come to Camp Randall a lot. They hosted Alabama earlier this year. They hosted Penn State earlier this year. Mm-hmm. In the past, they've hosted some really good Ohio State and Michigan teams as well. What's it like when it's Oregon, considering this is a team that really hasn't traveled to Camp Randall in a couple of decades?
Yeah, there's a ton of excitement, guys, and I think it would be even higher if maybe that last Iowa game that I mentioned was a little bit closer. However, we've got this buffer now of the bye week, and I think fans are starting to get, I won't say as far as maybe optimistic, but very, very excited because of the potential. Any night game at Camp Randall is fun. I think a lot of fans, from what I understand, really respect kind of how Oregon has come into the Big Ten and, come in with like a physicality and not necessarily tried to change the way they play. I think Lanning gets a lot of credit for that too. And, if you guys need any recommendations or anything, let me know. But following a top 10 basketball matchup Friday, Madison is going to be a buzz this weekend.
Yeah, I was just going to touch on that real quick. Like, we get in Friday night. I think there's going to be a lot of Duck fans that are going to try and travel to this game, whether they're Midwestern people or some from the Pacific Northwest. But Madison feels like it's going to be the spot because Arizona comes to town Friday, a top 25 game against the Badgers Friday night, and then the number one team in college basketball or college football is in town. I think hockey is also a big thing there, right? And it's going.
Yep.
What's just the town going to be like from a party specific area? I mean, Eric and I went to Ohio State for the first time 4 years ago, and the town was nuts leading up to the game. Obviously, it was different after because of the outcome, but it was a fun experience, the one we weren't really expecting.
Yeah, I would say Madison will be even better. And that's not even super biased because I've done Columbus before. Madison will turn up really for anything. And, obviously a couple huge games this weekend. I don't think it's supposed to be crazy cold. If you guys are looking for, a little fun Friday or kind of leading up to the game, State Street is a great spot to be. As is, if you got time for a little pop or something Friday night, Regent Street, which will get you a little bit closer to the stadium too, always kind of buzzing in the weekends.
Cool. Well, man, Nick, really appreciate the time. Really appreciate the insight into this Wisconsin team. We'll certainly catch up with you in the press box Saturday. Hopefully we're dealt with a good game. But thanks for coming on the Autzen Audibles Podcast.
You bet, guys. Thank you so much for having me. We'll see you soon.
All right. Talk to you later, folks.